our beloved Reverend Dr. Noel McGinnis, a rock, kind of like foundation and walls of this community, a man who contributed to our movement in ways that are impossible to name. He founded communities. He was our board of trustees chaplain since this community began. He never missed a meeting until just recently. I would consider Rev Noel to be a theologian of New Thought, and I do not use that word lightly. He made his transition. He crossed over to the other side of life last week on May 1st. And again, we will be celebrating his life on May 27th at 2 p.m. here in person and online. I know there are those of you all over the country who will be joining us for that. So for all of us who had the great blessing in this life to know Rev Noel, we share something. After every single encounter we had with him for as long as I have known him, which is a very long time, when we would part, when we would leave either, a class or a board meeting or even just a conversation out in the hallway as we were parting, he would say, "Stay in the grace. Stay in the grace." My talk today is called Staying in the Grace. It is the deepest bow that I could think of to give him today, to talk about something he obviously loved, grace. So, what is grace exactly? Well, I gotta tell you, friends, that this is trickier than I originally thought, this whole grace thing. The totality of grace is actually not easy to articulate. It's like trying to describe God or Spirit. There just really aren't words that can fully do that. However, I think that most of us know what it feels like to be the recipient of grace. Yeah? We know what that feels like. And I dare say most of us know what it feels like when we are not experiencing grace. Oh. Meaning we know what it feels like to be out of alignment, when things feel off. We know when we have made the choice to step outside of grace or the divine atmosphere of love and flow. Grace never leaves us, but on occasion we leave it. I have spent all week contemplating and unpacking and really being with this idea of grace. I will tell you, friends, we have a gazillion spiritual books about forgiveness and gratitude and love and contemplation and meditation. Not so many about grace. Really, not so many. And now I understand why, because it is such an ineffable idea. It is hard to pin down fully. Because the moment that we try to describe something that is ineffable and infinite in our limited human language, we risk making that thing or that subject finite and actually limited. So with this caveat, understanding that I'm talking today about something that exceeds human language and that really is not something that can be fully described, I shall give it my best for you, Rev Noel. So the word grace has two meanings. According to Webster's dictionary, God's grace is divine love and protection bestowed freely on people. And this comes from the Christian definition of grace. However, that idea, that sort of an outside, up there in the sky, male God bestows grace upon us, does not really land with our New Thought, progressive teaching. Because in our new thought philosophy, spirit or God or the divine is not a deity above somewhere on some cloud bestowing anything upon us. Rather, God, source, spirit, is the ineffable presence of love itself. It is the very air we breathe. It is the ground we walk on. And in our teaching, we understand that we co-create with this love. We co-create with the divine that is everywhere present, in, through, and as all things. Ernest Holmes wrote, "Grace is the givingness of spirit to its creation." That was his definition. Isn't that beautiful? Grace is the givingness of spirit to its creation. Grace is givingness of spirit. For me, that lands very differently than grace has been bestowed. Grace is the givingness of spirit to each of us. The ancient meaning of the word grace, the etymology of it, is also connected to the idea of giving thanks, of having gratitude. I find this so exquisite. If you ever say or ever did say grace before a meal, in that moment, you are extending your gratitude for the gift of the meal. It's literally called saying grace. Saying grace. And within these two definitions, the givingness of spirit to us and our gratitude for that givingness, there are still so many aspects of grace to be discovered. And for me, contemplating this all week, the way it lands in my heart, the best way that I can explain it, the definition that I have come up with that works for me, is that really when we whittle it all down, grace is the activity of love. Grace is the activity of love. It is the divine force on the seen and the unseen sides of life that propels and infuses the activity of love in action. Grace is love in action. Grace is love in action. Keywords, in action. So there's this Italian joke that I love about this poor man who goes to church every single day and he prays before a statue of a great saint. He says the same thing every single day. He says, "Dear saint, please, 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 give me the grace to win the lottery." And this lament goes on for months and months and months until finally, the exasperated statue comes to life. And he looks down at the man and he says, "My son, please, 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 buy a ticket." Grace is a verb. Grace is an action word. Last week, I talked about the largest living organism in the world. It's called the pando, if you recalled. And if you didn't see that talk, I invite you into it because it's connected to this one. The pando is located in Utah, and it's actually one aspen tree whose roots spread underground, and it cloned, and it's now a huge grove of glorious aspen trees, over 40,000 tree trunks. Remember I showed you that picture? That's the largest single living organism in the world. And the reason for this, the reason that it cloned, is because underneath the ground is this complex, magnificent, divinely intelligent root system that connects and intertwines these trees, allowing for more life. And I used this analogy that like the panda, we humans have an invisible divine root system that connects all of us to each other. And so building and continuing this conversation from last week, it is precisely that very divine connectivity, our own human divine root system, that is grace itself. That is grace. Because it is the activity of love that connects us to one another. We have all experienced grace. We have all, every single one of us has experienced love in action. I would like to invite us together, if you are willing, into a spiritual practice so that we can more deeply understand how grace works in our lives. Sound good? Are you willing? All right. So those of you here in the room and those of you online, those of you listening, if you're driving, please pull over. I invite you to take a deep breath and turn within. And just allowing your heart space to expand, to open. That heart chakra, that place where love lives at the center of your being. I invite you to turn towards it and allow it to expand even more in this next breath. I invite you on this next breath to think of a time when you were forgiven for something. Think of a time when you were forgiven for something. That was grace. On this next breath, I invite you to think of a time when you forgave someone else. Think of a time when you forgave someone else. That was grace. Taking in another gentle breath. Think of a time when someone helped you in a time of need. Just think of that. A time when someone helped you in your time of need, whatever that is for you. That was grace. And now I invite you to think of a time when you helped someone else during their time of need. When you helped someone else during their time of need. That was grace. Now I invite you to think of a time when you experienced a miracle or answered prayer. Think of a time when you experienced a miracle or answered prayer. That was grace. Now I invite you to think of a time when you were answered prayer for someone else. Think of a time when you were answered prayer for someone else. That was grace. In the energy of this grace, I invite you to anchor this in your memory so that it is amplified within you and becomes an internal, gentle reminder that you, my dear, are here to be love in action. The divine flows through each one of you, and you, my love, are here to be the recipient of grace and the giver of grace. You are here to be in the flow of grace itself. And now I invite you to take a deep breath and gently return to the room that you are in, feeling the love all around, all around. I invite you to stay in this grace. Stay in this activity of love. And if you find yourself, as we humans do, stepping out of this energy, this field of love, I invite you to just gently on the breath, it doesn't have to be complicated or difficult, just gently on the breath, step right back in. Just recall this moment that's anchored in your memory. Recall this moment, take a breath, and step right back into the energy field and the activity of love that is grace. I promise you it gets easier with practice. I believe this is what Rev Noel was reminding us of. To stay in the energy field of this kind of grace. Can you feel it? This is a daily spiritual practice. I think that's why he reminded us so often. John O'Donohue wrote, "Grace is one of the most majestic words in theology. No one can set limits to the flow of grace. Grace is the permanent climate of divine kindness." Grace is the permanent climate of divine kindness. Remember, grace doesn't leave. We leave it. When we choose grace, we are choosing divine kindness. We are aligning with Spirit itself. When you think about it, so often we are just gracing all over each other. I think I'm just going to call that a new word of mine, gracing. Let's be gracing. And we do that. We get to do that, don't we? This grace, this gracing, this activity of love, think of it like a river. It flows from the magnificent source, the infinite ocean of God, if you will. And we, my friends, we have incarnated here at this time to be the river of the divine. We are here to flow with grace with each other through the rocks and the valleys of life. To, with God, with Spirit, as it says in the Hebrew Bible in Isaiah, to help make the crooked places straight. When we are supporting others, we're being divine helpers in this way. We are called in this way to provide nourishment and love where it is being called for in the world. I would like to complete today by sharing a piece known by many of you. It's written by Reverend Dr. Noel McGinnis, and it is about this very same river. It's called Flow. Be as water is, without friction. Flow around the edges of those within your path. Surround within your ever-moving depths those who come to rest there. Enfold them while never for a moment holding on. Accept whatever distance others are moved within your flow. Be with them gently, as far as they allow your strength to take them. And fill with your own being the remaining space when they are left behind. When dropping down life's rapids, froth and bubble into fragments if you must, knowing that the one of you, now many, will just as many times be one again. And when you've gone as far as you can go, quietly await your next beginning.